A sealed vault has protected the Crusade's greatest secrets for centuries. These are the Grand Master Archives, a legendary collection of lost documents, now revealing 30 astonishing mysteries. By the end of this journey, you will see this entire era through an entirely new lens, understanding how hidden truths reshape our world today. We will uncover a king's forbidden testament and a warrior monk's secret prophecy. What does it mean when history itself is a carefully constructed lie? These archives were far more than a simple library. They formed the clandestine heart of the three great military orders, the Knights Templar, the Hospitaller, and the Teutonic Knights. Within their secured vaults lay the true operational records of the Crusader world, a complete parallel history compiled by the Grand Masters themselves. This was not a collection for public eyes. It held everything from precise military strategies and detailed financial ledgers to the most private correspondence between the Order's highest-ranking leaders. Historian Dr. Elena Vance observes that the archives represent a parallel history, one written by the ultimate insiders, free from the propaganda of kings and popes. This is why their survival is such a profound mystery. They endured centuries of suppression, persecution, and deliberate dispersal. Their very existence defied those who sought to erase their power. The organization of these documents was a marvel of medieval secrecy. Scribes used complex cryptic codes to protect the most sensitive information, turning simple messages into unbreakable ciphers that shielded troop movements, treasure inventories, and political alliances. After the orders were disbanded, these precious records were scattered across Europe, hidden in private collections, forgotten church crypts, and even sealed within castle walls. The modern reassembly of these fragments is a detective story in its own right. Scholars have spent decades, like puzzle masters, working with 1 billion pieces, painstakingly matching torn edges and deciphering faded ink to bring this hidden chronicle back to life. Understanding this arduous journey from a guarded vault to a reconstructed truth is essential. It grants us the context to appreciate the staggering weight of the secrets we are about to uncover. The foundation has been laid, and the first mysteries are waiting just beyond the next door. A king's private diary, written in the faint, shaky hand of a dying man, holds the first great secret of the archives. Baldwin IV, the leper king of Jerusalem, is often remembered as a tragic figure, a young man slowly succumbing to a terrible disease while his kingdom crumbled around him. But his personal journal, recently decoded, shatters that image entirely. These are not the mournful scribblings of a victim. They are the meticulous records of a master strategist playing a desperate endgame from his sick. The pages reveal his profound fear that the very man he was forced to name as his heir, Guy de Lusignan, would lead Jerusalem to ruin. Baldwin saw in Guy not a protector, but a recklessly ambitious knight whose pride could undo decades of fragile peace. This led the king to a radical and clandestine plan. He did not want Guy or any single man to hold sole power after his death. His true testament, hidden from the official court chronicles, called for a council of regency. This governing body, composed of the kingdom's most seasoned barons and military commanders, would have collectively guided the realm, tempering any one individual's dangerous ambitions. He was attempting to build a system that could survive his absence. Perhaps most startling are the fragments of correspondence with his legendary adversary, Saladin. The diary hints at back-channel communications, feelers extended for a lasting truce that recognized the fragile balance of power in the Holy Land. A potential peace, brokered from a deathbed, was a real possibility. But the king's carefully laid plans were systematically dismantled by the very court intrigues he feared. Powerful factions, seeing their own influence threatened by a collective regency, maneuvered to ensure Guy de Lusignan would ascend to the throne. The result was the catastrophe Baldwin had prophesied. Guy's poor leadership directly led to the disastrous defeat at the Battle of Hattin and the subsequent fall of Jerusalem itself. The discovery of this lost testament forces a complete reassessment. Baldwin IV was not a passive symbol of suffering. He was a visionary political mind, fighting until his last breath to secure a future for his kingdom. His true legacy is not his illness, but the wise and stable government he tried to create. One can only wonder how different history would be if his final, whispered commands had been heard over the clamor of swords and ambition. This redefinition of a king opens the door to our next mystery, a secret of faith and finance hidden within the very stones of a fortress. The staggering wealth of the Knights Templar has always fueled legends of lost treasure, but the archives reveal a far more profound reality. Their financial empire, a medieval precursor to international banking, served a purpose that went far beyond mere profit or power. Meticulous ledgers and coded expenditure reports show the order was pouring immense resources into a secret, decades-long project of archaeological excavation. They were not merely guarding the routes to Jerusalem, they were digging deep beneath its most sacred ground. Invoices detailed payments for teams of specialized laborers, shipments of timber for shoring up tunnels, and advanced tools for subterranean work. The primary focus of this clandestine effort was the network of caverns and ancient structures lying deep below the Temple Mount. This was not a hunt for gold or jewels. The records consistently refer to a search for something they called primordial wisdom. This term suggests they were seeking foundational knowledge, perhaps lost texts, sacred artifacts, or evidence of a spiritual truth they believed predated all modern religions. Their wealth was not an end in itself, but the essential fuel for this grand, intellectual, and spiritual quest. This redefines our understanding of the Templar mission. They were not just warrior monks, they were also scholars and seekers operating in the shadows. Their military might provided the security and stability necessary for their true passion, the recovery of what they saw as humanity's stolen inheritance. The mystery intensifies when we ask what their relentless digging uncovered. The archives are frustratingly silent on the results, containing only the evidence of the search itself. Did they find scrolls from the lost library of Alexandria, or artifacts from Solomon's temple that held encoded secrets? The fact that their excavations were so extensive and well-funded suggests they discovered something significant, something they felt was worth hiding from the world. The sudden suppression of the order and the seizure of their assets in the early 14th century adds another layer of intrigue. Were their discoveries so dangerous or revolutionary that powerful forces moved to silence them and confiscate their findings? If they did unearth profound secrets, those artifacts or documents have never been officially recorded. They could have been smuggled away before the arrests, hidden in a network of pre-prepared vaults across Europe, or even transported to the New World. The true Templar treasure was never a chest of coins, but a legacy of seeking, a relentless drive to uncover a hidden history of divine knowledge. This transformation from bankers to intellectual adventurers sets the stage for another enigma, one written in the stars by a warrior who saw the future. Even the most celebrated heroes of the Crusades operated in a world of shadows. A cache of encrypted letters, hidden for centuries, details a shocking, temporary alliance between King Richard I of England and the feared Order of Assassins. This was not the stuff of legend, but a cold, calculated pact born from the brutal realities of the Third Crusade. The correspondence, written in a complex cipher to ensure total secrecy from Richard's own allies, outlines a clear agreement. In exchange for the assassins refraining from attacks on his forces and even eliminating specific, high-ranking emirs in Saladin's inner circle, Richard offered political concessions. He granted the assassins safe passage through territories he controlled and implicitly recognized their autonomy in their mountain fortresses. This was realpolitik in its rawest form. The Lionheart, the paragon of European chivalry, was willingly dealing with the very group his contemporaries branded as demonic murderers. The letters show a starkly pragmatic leader, one who understood that to defeat a powerful enemy like Saladin, he needed to use every tool available, even if it meant aligning with those he publicly condemned. This covert diplomacy completely upends the traditional narrative of the Crusades as a simple clash of faiths. It reveals a landscape where ideology was frequently set aside for strategic advantage. The alliance was likely kept secret from the rank and file of Richard's army and from other Crusader leaders, who would have viewed such a pact as a profound betrayal of their cause. This single discovery forces us to question the entire historical record. How many other secret agreements, hidden handshakes, and back-channel negotiations shaped the course of these holy wars, their details scrubbed from the official chronicles to preserve the myth of pure, uncomplicated conflict? The real war was not just fought on sun-baked battlefields, but in the quiet, coded messages that passed between sworn enemies. This glimpse into clandestine statecraft leads us to another kind of secret, one not of politics, but of pure survival, hidden deep within a fortress of ice and stone. Among the frantic records of Acre's final days lies a maritime mystery that defies all explanation. The Hospitaller archives preserve the last known details of a secret fleet, a squadron of ships unlike any other in the Crusader arsenal. Their construction was a masterpiece of medieval naval engineering, designed not for battle but for evasion, with sleek hulls for speed and dark sails for moving under the cover of night. Their mission was the most critical of the entire siege, to spirit away the city's most irreplaceable treasures as the Mamluk armies battered the walls. Meticulous loading manifests list their cargo, a collection that makes any historian's heart race. They carried sealed chests of holy relics, the complete archives of the kingdom's chancery, and a roster of the most vital artisans, scholars, and knights. These ships were the last hope for preserving the very soul of the Crusader kingdom. The logs confirm they successfully slipped through the enemy blockade on a moonless night, vanishing into the open Mediterranean. And then nothing, no wreckage ever washed ashore. No captured vessels were paraded by the victorious Mamluks. No survivors appeared in Cyprus or Sicily. It was as if the sea itself had opened up and swallowed them whole. The silence is deafening. One theory suggests they reached a prearranged, hidden refuge, a remote island or a secluded coastal stronghold where their knowledge and lineage were preserved in secret. Another, more unsettling possibility is that they were intercepted not by a storm, but by a rival power, perhaps an Italian maritime republic that seized their cargo and silently integrated the advanced ships into their own navy, erasing all evidence of the encounter. The most haunting question, of course, concerns what was lost. What foundational documents of the Kingdom of Jerusalem, what unique chronicles or sacred objects, now rest in an unmarked grave beneath the waves? The ghost fleet of Acre represents more than a sunken treasure. It is a phantom limb of history, the palpable absence of an entire cultural and historical legacy that simply vanished. This profound loss on the water finds a strange echo in a victory on land, one so improbable it has long been dismissed as pure myth. The final words of Jacques de Molay have echoed through history as a curse against his persecutors, but his true last testament was not spoken aloud. It was encoded. For centuries, his personal cipher was considered an unbreakable enigma, a final vault of secrets from the last Grand Master of the Knights Templar. Only now, with the aid of advanced computational cryptanalysis, has that vault been opened. The contents are not what anyone anticipated. There is no desperate plea for innocence, no bitter lament against the king and pope who condemned him to the flames. Instead, the decoded pages reveal a dense, complex theological treatise, a work of profound and startling prophecy. From his prison cell, de Molay penned a vision of the future that predicted the coming schisms within the church with unnerving precision. He foretold the Avignon papacy, that 70-year period when the seat of papal power would be moved to France, describing it as a necessary exile and a divine correction for an institution drunk on temporal power. Even more remarkably, his writings anticipate the core tensions that would erupt 2 centuries later as the Protestant Reformation, framing such an upheaval not as a heresy, but as an inevitable cleansing fire for a faith that had lost its way. This transforms our understanding of the man completely. Jacques de Molay was not merely a military administrator wrongfully accused. He was a radical religious philosopher, seeing his own gruesome execution not as a final injustice, but as a pivotal act within a vast divine narrative. He believed the order's destruction and his own martyrdom were necessary sacrifices to expose a deep spiritual sickness at the heart of the establishment. This forces a difficult and uncomfortable reevaluation. The simplistic image of de Molay as a pure victim is replaced by the portrait of a willing participant in a cosmic drama, a man who used his final days not to defend his earthly legacy, but to map out the spiritual consequences he was sure would follow. His intellect and his vision reach out from the ashes, challenging us to see the Templars end not as a simple crime, but as a catalyst for transformations that would reshape the world. This glimpse into a grand theological design finds a strange, parallel mystery in a much more earthly pursuit, the quest for a weapon that was never meant to be found. A legend whispered in royal courts for generations spoke of a mighty Christian king ruling a vast, unseen empire somewhere in the distant east. They called him Prester John, a figure of such immense power and piety that his very existence promised to turn the tide of the holy wars. For most of Europe, he was a comforting myth, a symbol of hope, but the Grand Master archives reveal a stunning truth. The Knights Templar did not simply believe in the legend, they were actively hunting for the man behind it. Their extensive network of spies and diplomats had pinpointed a real, tangible candidate they believed was the source of the stories, a powerful Christian king from the African kingdom of Macuria in Nubia. Detailed field reports from Templar agents, written after perilous journeys up the Nile, describe a formidable nation. They recorded the strength of the Macurian army, their devout Christian faith practiced for centuries, and the impressive fortifications of their capital. To the Templars, this was not a fable. It was a potential military alliance of earth-shattering importance, a Christian hammer that could strike the Islamic powers from the south while the Crusader states pressed from the north. The archives even contain draft treaties and elaborate plans for coordinated campaigns, mapping out a pincer movement that could have reshaped the entire map of the Near East. These were not the wistful dreams of storytellers, they were concrete strategic documents born from intelligence gathering and cold, hard political calculation. The quest for Prester John was, in reality, a serious and sophisticated diplomatic endeavor. It shows us a Crusader world that was far more globally connected and strategically ambitious than we ever knew. They were looking beyond the horizon, seeking allies across continents, using myth as a starting point for realpolitik. The tragedy, of course, is that this grand alliance never materialized. The proposed treaties were likely never sent, or if they were, the vast distances and competing crises of both kingdoms prevented any meaningful cooperation. One can only wonder how history would have changed if the Cross and the Lion of Mercuria had ever marched to war together. This forgotten diplomatic channel reveals a medieval world both larger and smaller than we imagine, where a king in Africa could hold the key to a war in Jerusalem. Such grand strategic visions, however, always depend on the loyalty of those who must carry them out, a loyalty that was about to be tested in the most shocking way imaginable. The iron discipline of the Teutonic Order was a carefully crafted illusion. Internal disciplinary records, long buried in the deepest vaults, expose a startling truth. While the order publicly presented itself as the unshakable bastion of Catholic orthodoxy in the pagan Baltic, it was secretly rotting from within. A significant faction of its own brothers, men sworn to convert or kill those they deemed heretics, had themselves embraced a forbidden faith. They were known among themselves as the Lithuanian Brothers, and their beliefs were a profound challenge to everything the order stood for. These were not merely disgruntled knights. They were men deeply influenced by the spiritual world they had been sent to conquer. Through prolonged contact with Eastern Orthodox communities and the native Prussian tribes, they had developed a syncretic belief system, a blending of traditions that directly questioned core Catholic doctrines. They challenged the absolute supremacy of the Pope, seeing the Bishop of Rome as merely one patriarch among others. Their private rituals, detailed in horrified reports from loyalist spies, incorporated elements from the very pagan practices they were supposed to eradicate. They might chant Christian prayers in sacred groves the native peoples held holy, or incorporate symbols of the natural world into their private meditations. For them, God was not only found in a cathedral, but in the ancient whispering forests they had been sent to clear. The Grand Masters were faced with an existential crisis. A public trial and execution of these heretical brothers would shatter the Order's reputation. It would reveal their ideological campaign to be a hollow shell, proving that the faith they imposed by the sword could not even hold their own men. So they embarked on a prolonged, quiet, and brutal campaign of internal suppression. The secret trial transcripts are masterclasses in cold bureaucracy. Accused brothers were not charged with heresy in open court. Instead, they were quietly reassigned to remote, freezing outposts or found guilty of minor infractions like insubordination, leading to their imprisonment in isolated monasteries. Some simply vanished from the records altogether, their names scrubbed as if they never existed. This was a silent civil war, fought not with swords but with ink and secrecy. The discovery of this internal cancer forces us to see these military orders not as monolithic institutions, but as fragile, human organizations, constantly being reshaped by the very cultures they sought to dominate. The greatest threat to their power was not the enemy outside the walls, but the heresy that had taken root within the chapel itself. This hidden schism reveals a world where belief was fluid and identity was contested, a tension that would find its ultimate expression in the fate of a single, legendary sword. A blueprint for a machine of impossible scale lies folded within the engineering logs. This was God's wrath, a weapon conceived not for the siege of Acre or Tyre, but for the very walls of Jerusalem during the First Crusade. The schematics depict a terrifying hybrid, a monstrous fusion of a counterweight trebuchet and a massive, iron-sheathed battering ram. It was designed to roll forward on reinforced wheels, its main arm capable of hurling stones of a size never before seen, while simultaneously protecting a crew that could operate a ram to pound at the base of the very same wall. It was a mobile fortress and an artillery piece combined, a single machine meant to break any defense through sheer, overwhelming force. The workshop reports are filled with a palpable excitement, detailing the procurement of specific timbers and the casting of unique metal components. The engineers believed they were building the key to victory, a divine instrument to unlock the holiest of cities. Then the record turns cold. A direct order from the Council of Commanders, sealed with the signets of the most senior lords, commands the immediate and total dismantlement of the project. The reason given is not a lack of funds or a change in strategy. It is a statement of profound moral horror. The commanders declared the machine's power to be ungodly. They feared that such a device would not just conquer a city, but would shatter the very concept of honorable siege warfare, setting a precedent for destruction so absolute that it could one day be turned against Christendom itself. In the midst of a holy war, a group of hardened military leaders drew a line. They saw a future where the engines of war could become too terrible to wield, even in the name of God. The engineers were sworn to absolute secrecy on pain of excommunication. The nearly completed components, the specialized gears and the giant forged hammerhead of the ram, were deliberately scattered, hidden in separate locations to ensure the machine could never be reassembled. This conscious choice to abandon a guaranteed military advantage for an ethical principle forces us to rethink the medieval mind. It was not a time of unthinking brutality. Here, at the climax of a desperate campaign, these commanders engaged in a complex moral calculus, deciding that some forms of power were too corrupting to be unleashed upon the world, even if it meant prolonging a siege and costing more of their own men's lives. The ghost of God's wrath is a testament to a road not taken, a moment where humanity briefly overruled its own destructive ingenuity. This deliberate suppression of a weapon finds a strange parallel in the active pursuit of another, one that was never lost but deliberately abandoned in a frozen wasteland. Their hospitals were the perfect cover. Beneath the quiet dedication of the brothers tending to the sick and wounded, a global intelligence network was quietly humming. The Hospitallers, celebrated for their medical charity, were in fact the supreme spymasters of the Crusader Age. Their commanderies and infirmaries, strategically positioned along every major trade and pilgrimage route, doubled as listening posts and relay stations for a web of informants that stretched from London to Karakoram. A constant stream of ciphered dispatches flowed along these lines, carrying secrets that could make or break empires. The most startling of these communications detailed direct negotiations with the rulers of the Mongol Ilkhanate. The archives preserve proposals where the Hospitallers offered their unparalleled medical services to the Mongol court, a priceless commodity in an era of palace intrigue and battlefield injury. In return, they demanded detailed intelligence on the strength and positioning of their common enemy, the Mamluk Sultanate in Egypt. These were not simple exchanges of information. They were bold diplomatic overtures, laying the groundwork for a grand strategic alliance. The brothers proposed nothing less than a coordinated Christian and Mongol crusade, a joint military operation to crush the Mamluks between two mighty armies. This was not the fantasy of a distant pope. It was a real, tangible plan being orchestrated by an order of monk knights from their bases on Cyprus and Rhodes. This network operated with a sophistication that put most European monarchies to shame. While kings were often trapped by court politics and limited resources, the Hospitallers had a permanent, trusted presence in dozens of critical locations. Their agents could be a Venetian merchant on the Silk Road, a Coptic scribe in Alexandria, or a disaffected emir in Damascus. They gathered everything from grain harvest reports that predicted army mobility to the gossip of a sultan's harem that revealed his state of mind. Every piece of data was filtered, analyzed, and forwarded to where it was needed most. This forces a complete re-evaluation of their humanitarian mission. Their famous hospitals were not merely acts of pious charity, they were the ultimate tool of soft power. By healing the sick, regardless of faith, they built immense goodwill and trust, opening doors that would have remained closed to any soldier or official diplomat. A Mongol general who received treatment from their skilled doctors was far more likely to share a crucial piece of military intelligence. Their mercy was both genuine and strategically invaluable, a perfect fusion of faith and realpolitik. The Hospitaller brother was a unique hybrid, a compassionate healer with one hand and a master spy with the other, proving that in the shadow war for the Holy Land, a bandage could sometimes be more powerful than a blade. The archives expose the Children's Crusade not as a legend of misguided faith, but as a chillingly cynical political operation. Official reports, once dismissed as fanciful, detail a meticulously planned campaign orchestrated by a shadowy network of radical clerics. These men were not naive dreamers. They were strategists who believed the sight of thousands of innocent children marching for the Holy Land would publicly humiliate Europe's warrior kings, shaming them into taking up the cross once more. The children were never meant to reach Jerusalem. Internal communiques map out a deliberate route south, directly toward Rome itself. Their goal was to lay siege to the Vatican, to place their small, vulnerable bodies before the Pope and demand he authorize a new crusade. This was a form of spiritual blackmail, using the perceived purity of the young as a weapon against the political inertia of their elders. The movement was even secretly funded by a cabal of powerful nobles who saw it as a useful tool to pressure the papacy and advance their own regional interests. The tragic fate that befell these young pilgrims was not an accident of history. The records strongly suggest that their dispersal, enslavement, and disappearance were the direct result of covert actions. Maritime authorities in Genoa and Marseille, acting on unofficial orders, systematically blocked the children from securing passage. Rival political factions, viewing the uncontrolled movement as a threat to public order and their own power, worked to ensure its failure. The children were not simply lost, they were deliberately dismantled. This transforms a story of tragic folly into a stark lesson in medieval power politics. It reveals a world where faith was a currency to be spent and innocence was a resource to be exploited and then discarded when it became inconvenient. The real mystery is not why the children marched, but why the powerful felt so threatened by their quiet, determined footsteps. Deep within the Templar inventories, listed between mundane supplies of candles and ink, are entries for objects of profound mystery, the Black Madonnas. These dark wooden or stone statues of the Virgin Mary were not merely devotional art. The accompanying restoration guides and ritual texts reveal they were central to the order's most secretive ceremonies. Their dark complexion was not a result of aging or soot, but an intentional, deeply symbolic choice. The archives explicitly state the darkness represents the divine feminine as the fertile, hidden earth, the black soil from which all life springs, and the cosmic night that cradles the stars. She was venerated as Sophia, the keeper of a secret, primordial wisdom accessible only to the initiated. This was a radical departure from the official, luminous Virgin of mainstream medieval worship. The documents forge an even more explosive link, tracing the origins of these specific statues to regions where the Templars conducted their extensive underground excavations. They identified sites once sacred to pre-Christian goddesses like Isis, Cybele, and the Great Mother. The Black Madonnas were not replacements for these older deities. They were seen as their direct Christian continuation, a deliberate fusion of beliefs that created a unique and powerful spiritual synthesis. A knight kneeling before a Black Madonna was not just honoring the Mother of Christ. He was connecting with an ancient, earth-based lineage of the sacred feminine, a concept the official church had systematically marginalized. This provides the first tangible, documented evidence for the whispers of Templar heresy that have swirled for centuries. Here was a spiritual practice endorsed and ritualized at the highest levels of the order that embraced a world view the Vatican would have condemned as dangerously syncretic, if not outright pagan. These statues were far more than icons. They were portals to a different kind of faith, one that saw divinity not only in the heavens but also in the dark, fertile heart of the world itself. This hidden veneration of an earth goddess finds a chilling parallel in the very real and very deadly geological forces that would soon turn a city into a tomb. The final bastion of Crusader power was not felled by a mighty army, but by a column of numbers on a ledger page. The Kingdom of Cyprus, ruled by the Lusignan dynasty, stood as the last flickering torch of the Latin East, a seemingly secure island fortress. Yet the archives reveal its true undoing was a silent, calculated financial siege. Meticulous economic reports and royal account books detail a kingdom drowning in debt, not to a military opponent, but to a consortium of shrewd Italian merchant banks from Venice and Genoa. The kings of Cyprus, desperate to maintain the illusion of their former glory, took out enormous loans. These were not for building fleets or fortifications. The money was spent on lavish court ceremonies, imported silks, and extravagant palaces, a desperate attempt to project power they no longer possessed. The loans were secured against the kingdom's future, specifically the immense profits expected from its famous sugar plantations and vineyards. For a time, the system worked. The banks extended more credit, the court enjoyed its luxuries, and the kingdom appeared prosperous. But this was a deliberate trap. The Italian bankers had no interest in the long-term health of Cyprus. They saw a vulnerable state, rich in resources but poor in financial acumen. In a coordinated strike that would feel familiar to any modern economist, the banks called in their massive loans all at once. It was an engineered liquidity crisis. The kingdom's sugar and wine production, however bountiful, could never generate the sheer volume of cash needed to meet the immediate, simultaneous demands. The Lusignan treasury was instantly emptied. The government was forced to surrender control of its most valuable assets. The crown handed over the management of entire ports, the collection of customs duties, and even the administration of the royal monopolies on salt and sugar to the very bankers who had engineered the collapse. The kingdom became an economic puppet, its strings pulled from counting houses in Italy. Its foreign policy was neutered, its ability to raise an army crippled by a bankrupt treasury. This was a conquest achieved without a single galley setting sail for invasion. The real enemy was not the Ottoman fleet that would arrive decades later, but the quiet, relentless power of compound interest and contractual obligation. This forgotten financial war teaches us that the most effective sieges are not laid against stone walls, but against a nation's balance sheet, a lesson with a chilling and undeniable echo in our own time. This quiet collapse of an economy finds its violent counterpoint in the explosive failure of a different kind of power, one that tore a city apart from the inside. The personal diary of a Crusader saint holds a secret that could have unraveled the entire theological justification for the holy wars. Among the personal effects of a man celebrated for his martial piety, church investigators discovered a small, handwritten gospel. This was not a copy of the standard texts read from every pulpit. It was a radically different account of the life of Jesus, one that emphasized pacifism and non-resistance above all else. This lost Crusader gospel presented a Christ who explicitly forbade his followers from taking up arms, even in defense of a holy place. The saint, a man lauded for his bravery on the battlefield, had privately clung to a faith that condemned the very violence that made him a hero. The archives preserve the only known copy of the official condemnation order issued by the church authorities who oversaw his canonization. They could not allow this contradiction to become public. The document coldly commands the immediate destruction of all copies of the Gospel, labeling it a dangerous and misguided text that would confuse the faithful. A single, charred fragment of the Gospel itself survived, hidden within the archives. It contains a quote attributed to Jesus that is not found in any other scripture. It reads, "He who lives by the sword shall die by it, and he who justifies it corrupts my word." This single sentence is a thunderous condemnation of the crusading ideal. It suggests that not only is violence self-defeating, but the act of creating a religious rationale for that violence is a profound corruption of the original message. This creates an almost unbearable theological conflict at the very heart of the movement. How could a man achieve sainthood for actions that his own private faith seemingly defined as a corruption of Christ's word? The answer lies in a deep, pervasive anxiety that haunted even the most celebrated warriors. They were trapped in a terrible dilemma, torn between the official doctrine of the church that promised salvation through holy war and the quiet, insistent voice of a gospel that preached turning the other cheek. The existence of this text reveals that the dissent was not limited to pacifists on the fringe. It had infected the very heroes of the cause, men who wielded their swords with one hand while clutching a forbidden book in the other. This is the ultimate mystery of faith versus action, a silent schism in the soul of a soldier saint whose heart belonged to a God of peace, even as his sword fell in God's name. This hidden struggle over sacred text finds a parallel in the physical world, where an entire library of knowledge was sacrificed to the flames. The official story of Conrad of Montferrat's death was always a perfect dramatic tale. A king cut down by fanatical killers from the mountains, a martyr for the Crusader cause. The archives reveal a far uglier truth, one meticulously documented in a secret investigative report commissioned by the Hospitallers. This document reads like a modern detective's file, and it systematically dismantles the convenient legend. Conrad, the charismatic king of Jerusalem elect, was not killed by distant religious fanatics. He was assassinated by a conspiracy of his own rival Crusader barons, men who sat with him at council and broke bread with him. The report names names, detailing clandestine meetings in coastal manors and tracing payments of silver that originated not from Elamat, but from treasuries within the Kingdom of Jerusalem itself. These barons saw Conrad's strong will and independent power base as an intolerable obstacle to their own influence and to a unified command under Richard the Lionheart. The most shocking implication in the dossier is the suggestion of tacit approval from Richard himself. The Lionheart, frustrated by Conrad's refusal to fall in line with his strategic plans, may have deliberately looked the other way, allowing the plot to proceed without his direct involvement, yet reaping the political benefit. The two assassins who carried out the murder were not holy warriors on a divine mission. The archives suggest they were most likely low-level operatives, paid mercenaries hired specifically to provide a perfect scapegoat. Their very identity was the heart of the cover-up. By pinning the crime on the feared order of assassins, the true conspirators could cloak their political murder in the guise of an unavoidable religious conflict, a tragic but understandable casualty of the Holy War. The public would never suspect the real killers were the men mourning loudly at Conrad's own funeral. This transforms one of the Crusade's most famous murders from an act of religious terrorism into a sordid, calculated fratricide. It exposes a leadership so rotten with ambition that it would devour its own to secure power. The enemy at the gate was a known quantity, a force you could meet on the battlefield. But the ally at the table, the man who smiled and plotted your death over a cup of wine, that was the true, unseen danger. This chilling revelation of internal betrayal finds a strange and poetic counterpoint in the next mystery, where a different kind of killer, one without malice or intent, would bring a mighty city to its knees. The stones of cracked des Chevaliers were laid to a divine blueprint. Building plans and mason's notes, preserved against all odds, reveal that the fortress's legendary design served a purpose far beyond repelling armies. Its walls were not merely barriers of stone, but carefully calibrated instruments of spiritual and celestial observation. The entire castle functioned as a massive calendar and a symbolic representation of the heavenly Jerusalem, a theological concept made physical. Specific towers were precisely aligned to frame the sunrise on the summer and winter solstices, casting shafts of light that would illuminate particular courtyards or chapels on those sacred days. This transformed the changing seasons from an abstract concept into a visible, annual ritual witnessed by every knight and sergeant within the walls. The dimensions of the Great Chapel were not an architectural whim. They were calculated using the exact proportions described in the Bible for Solomon's temple, creating a sacred space that was, in essence, a recreation of that holiest of sites. A knight praying within that chapel was not just in a military outpost, he was standing in a symbolic echo of Jerusalem itself. This was a conscious design philosophy passed down through generations of master masons, a secret tradition blending practical military engineering with profound esoteric symbolism. The fortress was a silent, continuous sermon in stone, intended to elevate the minds of its defenders and connect their daily duties of watchfulness and prayer to a vast cosmic order. It reminded them that they were not just soldiers holding a remote castle, but guardians of a spiritual ideal, their very home an earthly reflection of a divine kingdom. The greatest Crusader castle was therefore a machine for shaping consciousness, a physical environment engineered to produce a specific state of pious, ordered devotion. This architectural marvel, a fusion of war and worship, finds its stark opposite in the next mystery, where faith was not built up with stone but torn down with fire and fear. While knights fought for the holy city, another, quieter war was being waged in the granaries and marketplaces. A collection of Hospitaller merchant ledgers and intercepted letters exposes a conspiracy of almost unimaginable cruelty, a deliberate engineering of a humanitarian catastrophe for profit and power. During a terrible famine that gripped the Levant, a cabal of Crusader lords and Italian merchant houses made a cold-blooded calculation. They began systematically buying up and hoarding the region's entire grain supply. Secret contracts signed with wax seals instead of swords detailed their plan to create an artificial scarcity. They warehoused mountains of wheat and barley in fortified storehouses, protected by private armies, while just beyond the walls people starved in the streets. This was not an act of war against a foreign enemy. It was economic warfare aimed at their own rivals, both Christian and Muslim. The goal was simple: to drive grain prices to impossible heights, bankrupting competing lords and weakening the armies of emirs who could no longer feed their troops. The conspirators would then step in, offering loans and food at exorbitant rates, seizing land and political influence as collateral. They were not just selling grain, they were trading in despair, using hunger as a weapon to break the will of entire cities and consolidate their own control over the remnants of the population. One chilling inventory lists the contents of a hidden granary in Acre, stockpiled with enough food to feed the city for a month, while daily reports logged the rising number of dead from starvation just outside its gates. The men who orchestrated this scheme were the same leaders who publicly swore oaths to protect the Christian populace and defend the Holy Land. Their piety was a hollow performance, a mask for a greed so profound it viewed human life as a mere commodity to be manipulated. This famine conspiracy forces us to confront a difficult truth. In the brutal calculus of power, the banner of faith could be lowered and the flag of pure, unadulterated self-interest raised in its place. It reveals that the greatest threats to survival often came not from the besieging army at the gate, but from the well-fed profiteer counting his coins within the citadel. This calculated cruelty, hidden behind ledgers and contracts, finds a stark and terrible contrast in our next mystery, a force of nature so indiscriminate and violent it rendered all human scheming utterly meaningless. A final, desperate squadron of Templar ships did not simply vanish into the Mediterranean fog. Their last known navigational charts point south, far beyond any known trade route, into the terrifying emptiness of the South Atlantic. These are not the fanciful maps of cartographers filling blank spaces with sea monsters. They are practical, working documents used by seasoned mariners, marked with precise celestial readings and detailed notes on currents and winds. The accompanying captain's logs, written in a terse, urgent hand, describe a journey into a world gone mad. They speak of weeks sailing through a thick, freezing mist, of encountering floating islands of ice that glowed with an unearthly blue light. The most chilling entry details a day when the fog finally parted, revealing a sight that defied all comprehension, a stark white coastline of mountains that reached into the clouds, a land of eternal winter. The description of these impossible mountains of ice and the strange, disorienting skies where familiar constellations vanished aligns perfectly with the approach to the Antarctic continent. This was not a journey of conquest or trade. It was a flight for survival, a frantic search for a sanctuary so remote that no pope or king could ever reach them. The Templars possessed a unique combination of maritime knowledge, drawing from the advanced portolan charts of the Mediterranean and the tough, open sea traditions of Norse explorers. They were perhaps the only seafarers of their age with both the technical skill and the desperate courage to attempt such a voyage. The logs end abruptly, leaving us with an agonizing question. Did they merely sight that frozen shore from the relative safety of their ships, or did they, against all odds, find a way to make landfall on that alien continent? No archaeological evidence has ever been found to confirm a landing, no ruins or artifacts on the ice, but the mere possibility, recorded in their own words, shatters our timeline of exploration. It suggests that the human drive to discover, to push beyond the map's edge, was not born in the Renaissance. It was a flame carried by exiles, by men who had lost everything and had nothing left to lose but their lives in the pursuit of a final, impossible refuge at the end of the world. This ghostly Antarctic voyage stands as a testament to their unbroken ambition, a final, breathtaking reach into the unknown that forever changes our understanding of the medieval horizon. Their own suffering became their banner. The Order of St. Lazarus presented a unique and unsettling paradox within the Crusader world, a military brotherhood where a significant portion of its knights were afflicted with leprosy. These men lived a double exile, set apart from society by their disease and often segregated within their own order by their healthy brethren. The archives unveil a deep and painful schism that fractured the order from within. The leper knights, many of whom were seasoned warriors before their diagnosis, began to demand the rights they felt their sacrifice had earned them. They argued that their disease was not a sign of divine punishment, but a mark of sacred sacrifice, a living martyrdom that should grant them equal standing, not permanent relegation to the infirmary. This was not a quiet plea. It was a forceful campaign for dignity and agency, a civil rights struggle waged from inside a hospital ward. The conflict escalated beyond petitions and debates. In a stunning act of defiance, the Leper Knights of a major commandery staged a quiet coup, effectively seizing control of their own fortress. For a brief, remarkable period, they governed themselves, proving that their bodies, though ravaged by illness, still housed the minds and spirits of capable leaders and warriors. They established their own rule, demonstrating that their will to serve and command remained unbroken. The archives preserve their passionate manifestos, documents that are heartbreaking and powerful in equal measure. In flowing script, these men wrote of their desire not for pity but for purpose. They begged for the chance to die with a sword in their hand, fulfilling the oath they had sworn, rather than fading away in isolated silence. Their words offer a profoundly human perspective on disease and stigma, a raw cry for meaning in the face of a certain and gruesome death. This internal war within the Leper Knights forces us to look past the medieval fear of contagion and see a timeless human drama. It is the story of any group fighting to be seen as whole, to have their capabilities recognized over their conditions. The real mystery is not that they were sick, but that their spirit to fight for their place in the world proved far more resilient than their flesh. The battlefield was never an exclusively male domain. Official chronicles may have written women out of the war councils, but the Grand Master archives tell a different story entirely, one where women not only influenced events but actively commanded them. These records restore a lost gallery of female commanders, strategists, and diplomats whose agency has been systematically erased. We find Elena of Aquitaine, often remembered for her royal scandals, meticulously detailed in Templar dispatches as a formidable political operator during the Second Crusade. She was no mere consort following her husband, King Louis VII. The archives reveal her holding separate councils with the military orders, challenging the king's flawed strategic decisions, and using her own vast network of vassals and allies to shore up the faltering campaign. Her influence was so profound that one frustrated Templar commander wrote she understands the mind of the enemy better than our own generals. This was not passive observation, it was active, high-level command from the shadows. Even more striking are the field reports concerning women like Stephanie of Milly, the Lady of Ultra-Jourdain. When her fortress of Crac de Montreal was besieged, she did not wait passively for a male relative to save her. The documents describe her personally directing the defense from the ramparts, allocating troops to the weakest sections of the wall, and managing the dwindling supplies with a commander's cool head. Her leadership was so effective that she held out long enough to force a negotiation, and it was she, not a male envoy, who then rode out under a flag of truce to bargain face-to-face with Saladin himself. The archives preserve the terms of their agreement, a testament to her diplomatic skill under the most extreme pressure. These women operated within a system designed to exclude them, yet they found ways to wield immense power. They leveraged their control over vast estates, their literacy, and their intricate understanding of both European and Levantine politics to become indispensable leaders. Their stories were often minimized by contemporary male historians, who preferred to cast them as damsels in distress or trophies to be won. The archives correct this centuries-old fiction, revealing a Crusader world where the line between a lord and a lady was often blurred by necessity and capability. This recovery of lost leadership forces us to completely redraw our mental map of the era, populating it not just with armored knights, but with shrewd women who held the fate of kingdoms in their hands. Beneath the hospital's quiet halls of healing, another kind of work was underway in absolute secrecy. The discovery of an alchemical laboratory under the Hospitaller Commandery in Tyre rewrites our understanding of medieval science. This was no dark chamber for futile attempts to create gold. The archives reveal it as a pristine research facility, a hub of intense chemical and medical experimentation that operated for decades. The records are filled with meticulous notes detailing the careful distillation of plant essences to create potent antiseptics that could cleanse battlefield wounds and prevent the gangrene that killed more men than swords. They experimented with opium derivatives to produce reliable painkillers, offering a blessed release from the agony of amputation or injury. In another section of the lab, other brothers worked with sulfur, saltpeter, and charcoal, methodically testing mixtures that would one day be known as gunpowder. For these monk scientists, this was a divine science, a sacred duty to understand God's creation at its most fundamental level. They believed that by unraveling the secrets of matter, they were drawing closer to the mind of the Creator himself. Their research was a form of prayer conducted with alembics and mortars. This places the military orders at the very forefront of technological inquiry, their hidden laboratories rivaling the great centers of learning in the Islamic world and beyond. The Crusades were not merely a collision of faiths on the battlefield. They were a clandestine contest of knowledge, a race to master the elements for both healing and destruction. The Hospitallers, in their dual role as compassionate caregivers and pragmatic warriors, understood that victory depended as much on the contents of a glass flask as it did on the strength of a knight's arm. This sophisticated fusion of faith and empirical research forces us to see these warrior monks in a new light, not as simple soldiers, but as pioneering scientists working in the shadows, their discoveries lost for centuries beneath the dust of a fallen city. Their most profound secret was a belief in their own inevitable failure. Tucked away in the archives is a collection of texts known as the Prophecies of the Grand Masters, a series of apocalyptic visions attributed to the highest leaders of the Templars, Hospitallers, and Teutonic Knights. These are not the ramblings of madmen, but chillingly precise forecasts, written decades and sometimes centuries before the events they describe. They predicted the inexorable rise of the Ottoman Empire, naming it as the new scourge that would sweep away the last Crusader holdings. They spoke of vast lands across the Western Ocean, a new world that would be discovered and would forever shift the balance of global power away from the Mediterranean. Most remarkably, they foresaw an age of reason, a great awakening where men would turn from faith to study the stars and the elements, a scientific revolution that would challenge the very foundations of the Church. The Grand Masters did not view these coming catastrophes as simple defeats. They framed them as a necessary and divinely ordained cycle, an age of fire and renewal that would burn away the corruption of a complacent Christendom to make way for a future, purified spiritual rebirth. This was not a hope for victory in their lifetime, but a faith in a cosmic reset that would occur long after they were gone. The leadership of the orders studied these documents with the utmost seriousness. This knowledge fundamentally shaped their long-term decisions, explaining their sometimes baffling political maneuvers and their almost resigned acceptance of certain losses. They were not just fighting for a kingdom on a map, they were acting out a role in a vast, pre-written divine drama. Their project, the entire 200-year endeavor of the Crusader states, was seen by its own architects as a temporary phase, a destined to fail but necessary catalyst in a story much larger than themselves. This transforms our understanding of their motivation. It suggests a level of historical perspective and theological depth that is almost breathtaking. These warrior monks marched toward their doom not in ignorance, but with a grim, prophetic certainty that their sacrifice was required to set a grander plan in motion. They fought not to win the war for the Holy Land, but to fulfill their part in a script they believed was authored by God Himself. The gleaming armor and noble vows of chivalry masked a far darker reality. Within the archives, a parallel and unofficial code governed the actions of knights in the Holy Land, a shadow doctrine that justified the unthinkable. This dark mirror of chivalry was a pragmatic guide for survival, one that systematically dismantled the very ideals it publicly proclaimed. Where the public code spoke of protecting the weak and honoring one's word, the shadow code coldly outlined when and how to break it. It contained detailed justifications for assassinating rival commanders, arguing that the death of one man could save thousands of Christian lives by preventing a battle. It provided the theological loopholes for launching surprise attacks during religious holidays when enemy guards were lowered, framing such acts as a righteous exploitation of pagan negligence. The most chilling sections deal with the logic of total war against civilian populations. The code argued that devastating the farmland and villages that supported an enemy army was not an atrocity, but a strategic necessity. It was a grim calculus of terror designed to shatter the enemy's will to fight by making the cost of resistance unbearable for the entire society. This was not the work of a few rogue knights. These were debated and endorsed principles, recorded in the private correspondence of commanders and chaplains who struggled to reconcile their faith with the brutal demands of a perpetual war. They created a separate moral universe for the Holy Land, one where the ends were deemed so sacred they could sanctify any means. A knight might attend Mass in the morning, then order the execution of a group of prisoners in the afternoon, his conscience soothed by a legalistic argument found in the Shadow Code that defined those prisoners not as men, but as ongoing threats to the divine mission. This systematic hypocrisy reveals the profound corrosion at the heart of the crusading ideal. The rules of honorable combat, so celebrated in song and story, were the first casualty in a war everyone believed was commanded by God himself. The shining armor was not just for deflecting swords, but for hiding the moral compromises worn beneath it. This descent into moral ambiguity finds its ultimate expression in the final, silent witness to the entire era, a single artifact that has guarded its secret until now. The bloodlines of those ancient wars still flow through the veins of millions today. Scientific studies analyzing modern Lebanese DNA have isolated a distinct genetic signature, a clear and lasting marker tracing directly back to the Frankish settlers of the Crusader states. This is not just a biological fact, it is a human story, and the archives give us the names and lives behind the data. They reveal a world far more complex and interconnected than any chronicle of battles could suggest. Legal registers are filled with marriage contracts between Frankish soldiers and local women, both Christian and Muslim. These were not secret, shameful affairs. They were formalized unions, recognized and often protected by both secular and religious authorities. We find wills where a knight from Normandy leaves his house and lands in Acre to his son, whose mother was a Syrian Christian woman from a prominent local family. There are court records defending the inheritance rights of these mixed heritage children against challenges from newly arrived European cousins who did not understand the society that had developed in the East. This was a world where a boy might bear a Frankish name like William, speak a hybrid language of Old French peppered with Arabic words, and celebrate both Easter and the local festivals of his mother's village. The archives document this cultural fusion in everyday life, from the adoption of local foods and clothing to the shared architectural styles that blended European fortifications with intricate Eastern design. This evidence systematically dismantles the enduring myth of a simple clash of civilizations. For every battle, there were decades of quiet coexistence, of shared marketplaces, of neighbors borrowing recipes and words, and ultimately building families together. The Crusader states were never purely European colonies. They evolved into vibrant, complicated melting pots, giving birth to a unique Levantine identity that was neither fully Frankish nor fully Arab, but something new entirely. The most enduring conquest was not achieved by the sword, but through the slow, powerful, and irreversible process of integration, a legacy written not only in stone and parchment, but in the very genetic code of the region. This silent blending of bloodlines finds a stark and deliberate contrast in the next mystery, where the goal was not integration, but the total and violent erasure of an entire people from history. The true tragedy of Antioch was not the fire, but the silence that followed. While the city fell in a storm of blood and steel, a quiet, desperate rescue mission was already underway in the shadows. The Grand Master archives hold the proof, not of a library's destruction, but of its salvation. Invoices and transport manifests detail a frantic, clandestine operation funded and executed by the Knights Templar. As the city walls crumbled, their agents were not fighting on the ramparts. They were in the scriptorium, carefully packing the most precious scrolls and codices into unmarked crates, disguised as common military supplies or sacks of grain. These were not random treasures. The inventory lists read like a ghost roster of ancient wisdom, items that historians believed were ash. They saved classical Greek philosophical texts, including dialogues of Aristotle that are absent from our modern collections. They secured early Christian Gospels, writings that presented a different path for the faith, sealed away before the Church could declare them heresy. Most surprisingly, they preserved advanced scientific works from the Islamic world, treatises on optics, medicine, and astronomy that represented the pinnacle of global knowledge. The Templars, often painted as simple soldiers, were acting as the guardians of human thought itself, recognizing that the true war was not for land, but for the survival of enlightenment. The rescued collection was a deliberate fusion of worlds, a library where the wisdom of Athens, Jerusalem, and Baghdad sat side by side, a testament to a lost era of intellectual exchange. This was no random loot. It was a curated archive, a final, desperate attempt to save the light of knowledge from the overwhelming darkness of war. The crates were then smuggled out through a pre-arranged network of Templar ships and commanderies, their destination a secret network of repositories scattered across Cyprus and the remote corners of Europe. And then the trail goes cold. The archives confirm the rescue, but they are silent on the final resting place. Did this great library remain intact, hidden in a forgotten cellar beneath a European castle or a sealed cave on a Mediterranean island? Or was it slowly dispersed over the centuries, its individual texts sold off or copied, their origins deliberately erased to protect them? Some of the greatest breakthroughs of the Renaissance, sudden rediscoveries of ancient knowledge, could have been whispers from this hidden hoard, fragments that finally escaped their Templar guardians. The fall of Antioch transforms from a simple tale of cultural loss into a profound mystery of preservation. What we have lost may not be lost at all, but merely sleeping, waiting for a key to turn in a lock no one remembers exists. A king's army was starving for gold long before it began dying of thirst. In the sweltering summer of 1187, as Saladin's vast forces gathered, the Christian ranks were being hollowed out from within by a crisis no sword could parry: bankruptcy. Payroll ledgers from those final weeks tell a story of progressive disintegration. Page after page records the wages owed to hundreds of Turcopole cavalry and seasoned Italian crossbowmen, the professional backbone of the Crusader army. These were not feudal levies bound by oath, but highly skilled soldiers whose loyalty was secured by a weekly payment of silver, and that silver had abruptly stopped flowing. The mercenaries did not simply grumble. They laid down their arms in a coordinated work stoppage, a medieval general strike that left the Crusader leadership stunned. The archives preserve the frantic, increasingly bitter correspondence between King Guy de Lusignan and the mercenary captains. The king's letters plead for patience, blaming empty coffers on poor harvests and the interruption of trade routes. The captains' replies are cold and unyielding, citing their own expenses and the families their men supported back in Constantinople or Sicily. They had marched under a holy banner, but they fought to feed their children. This was not a clash of faith, but a brutal lesson in contract law. The most experienced and disciplined troops in the army were now sitting idle in their camps, watching their supposed commanders argue over money while the greatest Muslim army in a generation advanced. This mutiny shattered the army's cohesion and, more importantly, its morale. The feudal knights looked upon the idle mercenaries with contempt, while the common soldiers saw the entire enterprise crumbling over a debt of a few thousand silver coins. When Guy de Lusignan finally gave the fateful order to march out to relieve the siege of Tiberias, he did so with a force already fractured by this financial schism. The professional scouts who should have guided them were gone. The steady crossbowmen who could hold a line were withholding their service. The army that trudged into the waterless hills toward Hattin was a ghost of what it should have been, its strength sapped not by enemy arrows but by unpaid invoices. Saladin's brilliant tactics sealed their fate, but the victory was handed to him on a ledger sheet. The real battle for the Holy Land was lost in the treasury, a silent, inglorious defeat that made the thunderous clash at the horns of Hattin almost a formality. This collapse of an army from within over mere coin reveals a profound and uncomfortable truth, that in the grim arithmetic of war, faith is a force multiplier, but payroll is the foundation. Without it, even the most righteous cause becomes a house of cards, waiting for the first desert wind to blow it into dust. Behind the accusations of idol worship lay a far more sophisticated spiritual rebellion. The archives have unearthed the complete disciplinary manuals for the secret ritual known as the Adoration of the Head, a ceremony that proves the Templars were not merely soldiers but dedicated mystics. This was not the crude worship of a demonic statue as their accusers later claimed. The manuals describe with painstaking detail a carved, bearded head, crafted from polished wood or pale stone, which they identified as Saint John the Baptist. For the brothers, this artifact was a profound focus for meditation, a tangible representation of the voice crying out in the wilderness. The ritual itself was a carefully structured journey inward. Knights would gather in a sealed chamber, dimly lit by a single lamp, and focus their entire attention upon the head. The goal was not to pray to the effigy, but to use its serene, silent features as a gateway to a higher state of consciousness. They sought to silence their own internal chatter and achieve a direct, unmediated spiritual insight, a personal revelation without the need for a priest as an intermediary. This was the core of the heresy. The Templars were pursuing a direct connection to the divine, a path that deliberately bypassed the entire formal structure of the Church. They saw John the Baptist as the ultimate model for this quest, a figure who operated outside the religious establishment of his time, calling for a personal and radical purification in preparation for the coming truth. The ritual was a powerful tool for self-examination, forcing each knight to confront his own spiritual wilderness. Can you hear the silence in that room, the quiet breathing of men seeking God not in a cathedral, but within the depths of their own souls? This practice made the order incredibly powerful and cohesive, but it also made them dangerously independent in the eyes of Rome. When the order was finally suppressed, this very ritual was grotesquely twisted into the central proof of their alleged demon worship. The nuanced meditative practice was recast in the trials as a sacrilegious kiss bestowed upon a monstrous idol. The true crime of the Templars was not devilry, but a silent, systematic pursuit of a personal god, a quest that threatened the very foundation of ecclesiastical authority. This search for a voice in the wilderness finds a chilling echo in the next mystery, where the silence was not spiritual but geological, and the voice that spoke was the earth itself, roaring in absolute destruction. The fertile lands of the Levant were deliberately turned into weapons of mass starvation. Beyond the clash of swords and the flight of arrows, a quieter, more insidious war was being waged against the earth itself, a conflict whose scars would last for centuries. The archives expose a chillingly systematic campaign of environmental warfare, a scorched earth policy practiced with brutal efficiency by both Crusader and Muslim armies. This was not the random destruction of a rampaging army. It was a cold, calculated strategy, meticulously documented in orders to salt fertile fields, dynamite ancient irrigation canals, and poison vital wells with animal carcasses and bitter herbs. The goal was to create a man-made desert, a buffer zone of utter desolation that would deny any future enemy the resources needed to sustain an army or a population. A commander did not need to hold a castle if he could ensure that no one, not even its original owners, could ever live off the land around it again. This early form of total war targeted the very foundation of life, demonstrating a grim understanding that controlling water and food was ultimately more decisive than winning any single battle. The consequences for the civilian population were catastrophic and intergenerational. A village that lost its well and its carefully terraced orchards did not recover in a year. It faced a slow, agonizing decline into poverty and abandonment. The documents record the haunting aftermath, reports of entire regions that never regained their former agricultural productivity, their soil rendered sterile, their water sources tainted by a legacy of bitterness. This brutal pragmatism stands in stark contradiction to the romantic ideal of chivalry celebrated in song and story. How could a knight swear to protect the innocent while ordering the destruction of the farmland that fed them? The answer lies in a grim calculus where ultimate victory justified any means, even if it meant starving children to break a king. The land itself became the ultimate, silent casualty of these holy wars, a patient entity that bore the wounds long after the banners had faded and the treaties were forgotten. This deliberate scarring of the earth finds a strange and terrible parallel in a force that was anything but deliberate, a natural cataclysm that struck without warning and without mercy. A city of white stone gleaming in the Syrian sun simply ceased to exist. Chastelblanc was a Templar marvel, a center of commerce and scholarship celebrated in chronicles for its beauty and its formidable defenses. Yet by the 14th century, it had vanished from every known map, its location lost to time and legend. The archives solved this geographical riddle with chilling finality, replacing myths of a glorious siege with a far more somber reality. The city was not conquered, it was surrendered. A series of devastating earthquakes, recorded in meticulous geological reports commissioned by the Order, had fractured the deep underground aquifers that were the city's only source of life. The pristine water, which had flowed for centuries, was now irreversibly poisoned. The surveys detail a catastrophic infusion of minerals and heavy metals, turning the life-giving springs into a slow, insidious venom. The Grand Masters were faced with an impossible choice. They could order their people to drink from a source that would bring a painful, wasting death, or they could orchestrate the most difficult of victories, a strategic retreat from a home they had built with their own hands. They chose the latter. The evacuation of Chastelblanc was a masterpiece of logistics and compassion. Every soul, from the highest knight to the lowliest artisan, was systematically relocated to other commanderies. Their treasuries, their sacred relics, and their vast archives of learning were carefully packed and transported. Then, with the city empty and silent, the Templars performed their final act of stewardship. They systematically dismantled its outer defenses, collapsed key access tunnels, and scrubbed its coordinates from their own navigational charts. They turned a vibrant city into a ghost on purpose, to prevent any future settlers from being lured to a beautiful, gleaming tomb. This is not a story of defeat, but of profound responsibility. In an age defined by conquest, the Templars made the conscious decision to lose a crown jewel rather than sacrifice the lives entrusted to them. The Ghost City stands as a silent monument not to military failure, but to a leadership that understood some forces cannot be fought with swords, only respected with a heavy heart and a planned, orderly withdrawal. His final resting place is a small shrine in the Syrian desert, visited by Muslim pilgrims who know him only as Sidi Ibrahim. The archives have yielded his true story, a personal testament so radical it was systematically erased from the official chronicles of his own order. He was a French knight, a veteran of countless battles, who left behind a journal charting a spiritual transformation that defied the very war he was sent to fight. The early pages are filled with the fervor of a young crusader, convinced of his divine mission, but as the years turned into decades, his script begins to change. The ink betrays a growing disillusionment, a soul sickness born of witnessing endless cycles of violence, and the stark hypocrisy of leaders who preached piety while practicing greed. He writes of his despair, a feeling that the God of love he had worshipped since childhood had been replaced by a God of banners and bloodshed. In his profound loneliness, he began to seek answers not from his own chaplains, but from the people he was supposed to conquer. He started learning Arabic in secret, first to understand military commands, then to read. He acquired a copy of the Quran, and his journal fills with amazed marginalia, noting the profound reverence for Jesus and Mary within its verses, seeing them not as foreign figures but as beloved prophets. This intellectual curiosity opened a door he could never close. He began sneaking out of his garrison at night, not for vice but for knowledge. He found his way to the gatherings of a famous Sufi mystic, sitting at the edge of the circle, listening to poetry and teachings that spoke of a God who was pure, unconditional love, a deity accessible through the heart, not the sword. His journal becomes a beautiful, chaotic fusion of traditions. He copies passages from the Gospels in Latin, then writes his own reflections in Arabic, weaving the two together into a single tapestry of devotion. He describes the Christian concept of grace and the Sufi ideal of fauna, the annihilation of the self in God, as two paths up the same sacred mountain. For him, the rigid boundaries between faiths were illusions, man-made walls that blocked the universal light of the divine. He formally became a disciple of the Sufi master, taking the name Ibrahim. He never renounced his Christian baptism, but he could no longer see it as the sole vessel of truth. He had arrived at a universalist faith, a personal religion built on the common mystic heart that beats within all the world's great traditions. His own order never knew. To them, he was simply a quiet, aging knight who kept to himself. When he died, it was the local Muslim community that buried him and began venerating him as a saint, a holy man who had found God through love. His story is a haunting what-if for history. He represents a path of reconciliation that was always possible, a road not taken amidst the clamor of crusade and jihad. In a time defined by absolute division, one soldier discovered that the most profound conquest is not of land, but of the human heart, and that the truest holy war is the one we fight within ourselves to tear down the walls of fear and dogma. Even as the last official Grand Master was burned at the stake, a shadow command structure remained intact. Fragmented letters and a single, heavily coded dispatch reveal the final order of the last acting Templar master in the East. His command was not a call to arms or a desperate last stand. It was a directive for absolute dissolution and calculated infiltration. He instructed his remaining knights to vanish, to shed their white mantles and deliberately scatter across the known world. Their new mission was to join other institutions, to weave themselves into the very fabric of society. They were to enter rival military orders like the Hospitallers, to take up secular trades as merchants and stonemasons, and some, in the most daring move, were even ordered to immerse themselves in Islamic scholarly circles and institutions. Their goal was no longer to conquer territory, but to become invisible guardians. They were to preserve the Order's most vital assets, its accumulated knowledge of finance, architecture, and international diplomacy, and its vast clandestine network of contacts. They became a hidden lineage, a secret river of influence flowing beneath the surface of history. This single command explains the persistent whispers and legends that have haunted the centuries since their suppression. It accounts for the sudden, mysterious expertise in navigation that propelled the Portuguese and Spanish explorers during the Age of Exploration, knowledge that seemed to appear from nowhere. It sheds light on the sophisticated philosophical and architectural principles that emerged within early Freemasonry, concepts that echo Templar traditions of sacred geometry and secret brotherhood. The Order did not die in the fires of persecution. It executed a perfect strategic retreat from public view, transforming from a visible army of God into an invisible society with an agenda spanning generations. The final and perhaps most unsettling mystery is not what they did in the past, but what they are doing now. If this hidden lineage persisted through the Renaissance and into the modern era, could they still be among us? Are there still guardians, the intellectual descendants of those exiled knights, quietly watching and waiting for a purpose we can only guess? Behind the grand narrative of holy war lies a far more intricate human story. These 30 mysteries, when pieced together, form a mosaic of stunning complexity, revealing a world where the official story was often a carefully constructed lie. The Grandmaster archives expose a consistent 300-year-long pattern of deception, a vast gulf separating public pronouncements from private actions. Kings preached crusade while secretly seeking truces. Military orders presented a unified orthodox front while hiding internal heresies, and financial conspiracies starved populations under the banner of faith. This was not a simple clash of cross and crescent, but a multidimensional battlefield where economics, espionage, secret diplomacy, and personal conscience constantly reshaped the conflict. The archives force us to see past the simplified facade of righteous knights and fanatical Saracens. Instead, we find human beings, flawed and brilliant, navigating impossible moral landscapes. A saint privately followed a pacifist gospel, a leper knight fought for his dignity, and a warrior found God in the teachings of his enemy. This is the true legacy of the Crusades, not a tale of pure good versus evil, but a profound lesson in the messy, ambiguous, and deeply human nature of history itself. The real mystery is why we ever believed it could be simple.